National Innovation Dialogue is a month-long event hosted by the United Nations Development Programme and Atal Innovation Mission, Niti Aayog. National Innovation Dialogue brings together stakeholders to establish a common agenda through capacity development, strengthening the coalition, and creating an enabling ecosystem in a national context. This year, the theme for National Innovation Dialogue is Climate Action and Innovation. The month-long dialogue will address students, entrepreneurs, and aspiring entrepreneurs through a series of workshops, panel discussions, roundtables, artist performance, and job fair. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the National Innovation Dialogue Sustainability Management and Policy Workshop. Right here, we have Professor Ishan Chaturvedi, sir. Welcome to you, sir. Let me just give you a small brief about Ishan Chaturvedi, sir. Professor Ishan Chaturvedi is an environmental and energy lawyer and scholar. He is the founder, director of the environmental consultancy firm Envipol, co-director of the Global Policy, Diplomacy and Sustainability Fellowship, assistant dean at the Jindal School of Environmental and Sustainability, and also the member of the prestigious global organizations such as the World Commission of Environmental Law, the International Association of Water Law, Rome, Global Network for Human Rights and Environment, the Global Policy Insights. He also holds a master's in the environmental law and policy from Stanford Law School, where he was selected as one of the top 20 rising environmental leaders. In his free time, he enjoys poetry and discussions on astrophysics and geopolitics. Without any further delay, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Professor Ishan Chaturvedi.
Thank you, Kasturi, and thank you, AIM, UNDP. I think it's a tremendous step in the right direction about bringing sustainability front and center, and also delivering it to entrepreneurs, prospective entrepreneurs, students who might at some point become interested in entrepreneurship, because climate change requires all of our knowledge, all of our innovation, and it requires urgency in each of those regards. So let me first thank all of you for joining in. Let me also welcome all of you. I hope that we're able to watch the recording, we're able to participate in the discussion that we undertake today. There's a reason why I say discussion, because I do not personally believe in monologues. I do not believe in one-way lectures. So that's how I have planned this discussion. I will be putting a lot of questions to all of you, and I hope that I'll receive some answers in response. I know that we cannot unmute ourselves and speak, but you have the chat box open, and if you send your answers in the chat box or your ideas in the chat box, I'll be happy to address them as well. We're also live on YouTube, so if there are any comments there, we'll also try and bring those in as we go along the session. Now, first of all, we're covering something that requires a lot of our attention, but it also is a very large topic where we're discussing environmental sustainability policy and management. And I'd like to give you bits and pieces of the large area that we're trying to tread upon. Okay, for doing so, I need all of you to interact, be a part of the discussion, be a part of the larger discussion, but also this session. I also have a request to, in your comments and in your answers, I'd ask you to respect others who are joining in as well. If you do get a chance to unmute yourself somehow, then I'd also ask you to restrict your questions to 30 seconds or shorter. And then finally, as I said, we're going to be covering bits and pieces of a large topic, which would then mean that I'll be covering the most significant aspects to understand the platform generally. And then we'll also leave at least 15-20 minutes for Q&A, so that we could also take up questions from all of you who are attending. All right. That being said, Kasturi sort of mentioned that I am passionate about astrophysics. However, let me also clarify that I'm not an astrophysicist, I'm an environmental lawyer, a mere environmental lawyer. I'm just passionate about reading about astrophysics. So let's start there. A quote that really moves me, that really makes me think about where we are in the environmental scheme of things. And this resonates with people such as yourselves who want to be entrepreneurs or who are entrepreneurs, or who are at the crossroads where you can choose to go into climate finance, or can choose to go into financial initiatives. You are also influentializing, and that I say. The quote reads thus: "If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe." All right. Am I audible fine now? Is it any better now?
It's better now, Ishan. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Sorry, guys. These are, as you go into the study of environment, much like what's happening with the internet right now, there are a lot of uncontrollables, and sometimes you have to make whatever you have in terms of resources work for you. So coming back to the quote, if you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. And why is it relevant when we're talking about sustainability policy, sustainability management? Because, as I said, a lot of us want to get into climate tech, we get into climate finance, climate banking, so many of these other branches of climate action, branches of environment. But sometimes we forget climate action, whether that's tech or science or policy or sociology, economics. All of that stems from a very basic concept of environment, right? And that's where we're starting. So when someone asks you to make an apple pie from scratch, how do you define the scratch? Does it mean that you have to source the apples yourself? Does it mean that you have to source the ingredients yourself? Or does scratch mean that you have to grow an apple tree and then pluck those apples and make an apple pie? Does it mean that you have to invent the soil? Does it mean that you have to invent atmosphere for the soil to exist? Does it mean that you have to invent the planet to be able to make an apple pie from scratch? Or does it mean that you have to go absolutely to the beginning of time and invent the universe for us to have apples today? And my argument would be that before we jump into various facets of climate, whether that's climate tech, climate finance, climate policy, climate diplomacy, very importantly, we must first invent the climate bubble, right? And that's something that's been found wanting at large scale when we get into, all right, thank you, Fasil. When we get into specifics of climate change, specifics of climate policy, of diplomacy, we go directly into the rate-based system of utility modeling, or we go directly into the evolution of the Paris Agreement, or evolution of the Environment Protection Act for those who are joining in from India, or the setup of California Air Regulatory Board if you're joining from the US. Those are but developments that have occurred on the foundation of climate. So what we are addressing in this session through this discussion is the fundamentals that have given rise to all of these things, right? So let's then invent the environmental universe together. And while I do this, you want me to speak louder? All right, this is I'm a soft-spoken person, guys. This is about as loud as I can get, but I'll try. Okay, let's try and invent the environmental universe, the climate change universe. And what's the most basic component of climate change? What is the most thrown around word in climate change. Environment, right? The most basic word on which we develop all of our understanding, from which we derive climate change, from which we derive Anthropocene and anthropogenic and societal behaviors and consumer behaviors and financial behaviors and carbon tax, cap and trade, Paris Agreement, Glasgow, all of those things stem from the very, very basic environment, right? And I can see that Amrit Prasad and some of us have already been able to get this. But let me take a step back and take you through my journey. Now, in the extremely, extremely humbling introduction that Kasturi gave about me, one thing that was missing was that I also had the pleasure of working with the United Nations quite a bit. I'm then in New York. And during my time in Geneva, I took on the definition of the term environment in I think, right? So how do you define environment in your country? I know that we have audiences here, sort of patient from other countries, but also the most commonly used terms to define environment, they are water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganisms, property, and their interrelationships amongst each other, right? So let me go over this again. Human beings, water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganism, property, and their interrelationships. Now, my question to all of you is, one, is there a common thread that you see flowing through each of these indicators on your screens? Or do you think that any particular thing is missing from this commonly globally understood definition? I'm going to give you 10 seconds if you can figure out any commonality or anything that's missing. So Suresh says earth. Suresh, I'm assuming you're saying that that's the common thing amongst all of them? Anyone else? What might be the common thing? What could be missing? Let's go with earth for now. Amrit says ecological interconnectedness. Human beings, Pratyup is saying. Very, very good point, all interesting points. But I'm going to take Pratyup's point and make it clear to you. Water, air, land, other living creatures, plants, microorganism, property. All of these things are those things that are required for your survival, for my survival, right? We cannot live without water, we cannot live without air, without land, without other living creatures, without plants, microorganism. I know that you do not consider microorganisms when you're in your everyday lives, but we know that bacteria and enzymes and everything is so important for our functioning, property. So almost all of the globally accepted indicators, yes, human beings is already listed there, and that is the common thread that I'm looking for, because all the other indicators have been included to define environment to serve human beings. You know, human beings turn out to be the thread in the globally accepted definition of environment. As I said, it's our perception, our senses have defined environment to be what it is today. Now, the obvious question would then be, if human beings are the ones against whom or towards whom environment is defined, then what is missing? What is missing from this definition? Could you think of anything that could have been added to this definition? Anything that should have been added to this definition of environment? Any guesses? Guys, no right or wrong answers here. What do you guys think? Anything that we could have added to definition? Climate, very, very important. So Amrit says climate should have been a part of this definition. Sustainable as a concept, sustainability should have been a part of this definition. Very interesting. Any other guesses? Any other points? What else could be the definition of environment? Commodities, so everyday goods, services, things that are consumables, things that add to the supply chains, manufacturing, things that cause waste, some might put it. All right, natural cycles and weather. I think we have a natural science expert with us. Anything else? So to give you an example, when I once asked this question in one of my classes, one of the students said, noise is missing. Noise, sound is missing. Until then, I hadn't really considered. I thought that I was thinking more in terms of what you will see next on my slide. But I did not really consider that noise could be a part of environment as well, but it should be. That student was right. And so are you. Sustainability, climate, commodities, all of these things are important portions that could be a part of the definition. Yes, exactly. Air versus noise, a very good point. Medium of travel of noise. So that counts as well, I suppose. But the point I'm trying to make here, guys, is this. A couple of years back, I was reading the news and I came across this news report from the Daily Sun, the Sun, right? And it talked about Psyche 16. I don't know if any of us have heard of this, but Psyche 16 is an asteroid floating between Mars and Jupiter, and it is supposed to contain precious metals worth 8,000 quadrillion pounds. 8,000 quadrillion pounds. And there are missions being set up to explore Psyche 16. NASA is doing it, SpaceX is doing it. Precious metals on Psyche 16 include gold, platinum, iron, nickel, maybe other things that we haven't really zeroed in on. But my question to myself was, if someone sent an exploratory mission to Psyche 16, and if technology and innovation and so many other things allowed us to mine Psyche 16, what law or what policy will cover this? Will there be an environmental impact assessment on this function, on this activity? Will there be a compliance mechanism? Will there be a consent to operate, consent to establish that operation? And the answer is no, right? Our space policy and space law regimes are fast developing, but they're not developing in a way that we already have some nuanced law that can control mining of Psyche 16 tomorrow. If you started on that journey and went to Psych 16 and started mining Psych 16. Now, why is that? Why is Psych 16 not covered in any of the environmental laws or mining laws or environment impact assessment policies, climate change policies? The answer boils down to the last slide. What's missing is, exactly as Amrit said, our definition of environment does not cover 99.9999% of the known universe, does not cover anything beyond our atmosphere, right? So because space, as Amrit says, is not covered in our definition of environment, we do not care. Exactly, Fasil is, as Fasil is saying, it's out of the countries, it's out of the earth. Whose jurisdiction is it? Is there any law that could govern us? You don't have a mining law, you don't have an environmental law that looks beyond earth. And how could it? Because environmental laws would govern environment, right? Environmental policies would govern environment. And the definition of environment, as we have seen, does not consider anything that humans do not require today, right? So space does not make the definition of environment. So if tomorrow you wish to take that trip, feel free to do it. There's absolutely no policy in place that would stop you from becoming a quadrillionaire if you so wish. Obviously, it would require a lot of capital-intensive activities from your end. But there's a string of thought that starts becoming clearer. There's a string of thought that shows us that a large portion of environment is not covered by the term environment legally in the policy sphere. But some of you might argue that, listen, human beings invented the term environment. They defined the term environment. They use environment. They require environment. And what is wrong with defining it in a way that it's useful for human beings? So what is wrong with saying environment is made up of air, water, land, plants, microorganisms, property, other living creatures, when it is for our use and we're defining it on our convenience? And to those of us who are asking that question, I have two counter questions for you. I'm assuming some of us are interested in the sciences. So the first question is, which are the 5 most abundant, 5 most common elements found in the universe? Now, there's a bit of a cheat I have made accessible for you. I will put up the periodic table on your screens. You can guess which might be the 5 most common elements in the universe. Okay, silica and titanium is the first guess. Anyone else? Hydrogen? Yes. All right, so Resh has hydrogen, helium, lithium, and a bunch of other helium. All right, so I'm now following Pragya, who says hydrogen, helium, Yogendra says nitrogen, Pratyup says oxygen. We have one remaining. Anyone else? One more element. Aluminium, no. Iron, no. Calcium, no. Yes, Arvind has guessed it. Arvind says carbon. So we've got a lot of answers here. The 5 most common elements that make up the universe, most common elements found in the universe, abundantly found in the universe, are hydrogen, helium, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. Okay, that's the universe that we're talking about. We're still at that point where some of us are claiming that, what's wrong with defining environment the way we want to? Because it's human beings who are defining it, so it could be in that region. Now, if I twist the question and ask you, which are the 4 most common elements that human beings are made up of? 4 elements that are most abundantly found in human bodies. Then what would those be? It's a trick question for those of you who are wondering. Again, the periodic table is in front of you. What guys think? Hydrogen, helium, carbon. All right, so we have Pratyuk, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen, which is, sure if you've attended any of my public lectures, but you're getting all the questions right. So maybe you have. But hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen are the 4 most common elements that human beings are made up of. Now, I don't know if you can put these 2 questions together that I've asked you. 5 most common elements found in universe: hydrogen, helium, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. Helium is an inert gas. We'll leave that aside. 4 most common elements found in human bodies: hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. Right? So, for those of us who were rooting for human beings, who were saying that, human beings should be able to define it however we can, we must first shed the hubris and realize that human beings are but an insignificant part of the larger universe, right? And then to not consider that unknown larger part of universe when we're defining environment is problematic. It is required to understand environment better, right? To have a holistic understanding of everything around us, not just the things that are required for you and me to survive. But again, some of you might still not be convinced, so I have another question for you. If this this field on your screens is an international, hypothetically, this is an international size football field, soccer field. And on the x-axis, this is the Big Bang, and this is today. When do you think human beings came into existence? You could tell me in the left half, right half, however you wish to tell me. But when do you guys think human beings came into existence? I'm not looking for right or wrong answers. I'm only looking for guesses. And if you get the guess right, you win a 15-minute discussion with all of us present on environment and climate change. Right half, but I need all of you to be a little more specific. So would it be the midline? Would it be the penalty box? Would it be the D? Inside right goalpost is what has come through. What else? If this is the Big Bang and this is today, where do you guys think human beings came into existence? We have 2 answers up till now. At goalkeeper's place, which side, right or left? Right, okay. So Henneth, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name right, but Henneth is saying at the extreme right is when human beings came along, at the goalkeeper's place. Anyone else wants to give this a try? All right. So most of you got this right. If this football field, hypothetical, is the timeline of 50 centimeters extreme right is what Pragya says, is the timeline of universe, and left 0, 0 is x-axis, this is today. Shine is saying near center, all right. So if that is the case, in the context of this football field, prepare to be amazed. Human beings came into existence equivalent to the thickness of the last blade of grass on the right-hand side. Remember, I said thickness, I did not say width. Average width of a blade of grass is 1/16th of an inch. We're talking thickness, which is a lot lesser, right? So that's how recent human beings are. And then to not include 99.999% of what should be environment within our definition, as we saw here, is full of hubris. So the first thing that we should take away from this session, from this discussion, is that we should understand environment in a more holistic way. Now, the obvious question would be, why do we have such a definition of environment? Why is it globally okay to only define environment according to your needs or my needs, human beings' needs? And that's because of one of the most prolific philosophies that human beings have followed over their civilizational history, which is anthropocentrism. Now, some of you will argue that, listen, anthropocentrism is not all-encompassing. It hasn't always been in existence, right? It isn't the know-it-all, be-it-all, the only thing that ever existed in terms of approaches. And I kind of agree. I know that indigenous and tribal communities around the globe and historically, even today, have had a non-anthropocentric way of living, but that's a very, very small minority. Majority of human beings throughout history have had an anthropocentric way of living. And I don't want to spend too much time here because I think anthropocentrism as a concept is generally understood. I think all of us would be aware of it. For those of you who do not know, anthro means human, human-like, humanoid. Centric is centric. So human-centric approach is anthropocentrism. But for those of us who think that, it's not as common or not as prevalent, and I segregate my waste, and I do not litter, and I conserve water, and I switch off the light panels and electricity panels, let me tell you that most of us living today, alive today, our individual carbon footprint is more than the cumulative carbon footprint of our forefathers put together. So before you say that, you're an ecocentric person, you're not anthropocentric, involuntarily our carbon footprint is so much more than the people who've existed in the past, right? So now, if that is the state of anthropocentrism, how do you explain everything that's happening in climate action and wonderful initiatives of UNDP itself and UNEP and so many things that are happening? My work, for example, a lot of my literature that I have authored, where has all of it come from? And for that, I will tell you a little story, and I know that we are short in time. So I'll also put in my request to organizers to share my email ID, and we can have a larger conversation about this. And there's also my website that was mentioned at the beginning of the session, so you could contact me from there. But let me tell you a little story about this, and then we'll have Q&A and discussions about. In case you guys haven't guessed, a lot of my stories start with questions to all of you. So my questions are two. From the photos you see on your screens, you have to guess the city and the decade. All three photos are what city is this? What decade is this? Guesses anyone? What city, what decade? In the photos on your screens. I'm not expecting the right answer here. I'm just expecting guesses. What city is this? What decade is this? Any guesses, anyone? We'll give it another 5-10 seconds. Any guesses as to what city is this? Chernobyl? No, it's not Chernobyl, but a good guess. Amrit says New York. So says Paris. No, none of those. Let me say that Amrit is closer, but on the wrong coast. What city would this be? Any other guess? Any guesses on? Hi guys, I'm sorry. I think I dropped off. I think I'm back now, and we'll continue from where we left off. So Pragya says Florida. No. Any final guesses as to the place or the decade? Any decade? Anyone? Okay, so let me dissolve the tension here. The city is the last decade. No, it isn't the last decade. The city is Los Angeles, and the decade is the 60s, but specifically late 60s. And for those of us who do not know this, LA was covered in a terrible, terrible smog during those times. Pollution was pretty bad. People feared for their health. Visibility was low. Some might even compare it to the to the smog of Delhi that happens every winter. But that's how the situation was in LA back in the 60s. And one thing led to another. There was a political movement about this. There was a citizens movement about this. People got together. People advocated for better pollution. Yes, Nimisha is right. People started congregating. They voiced their opinion about having better air quality, so on and so forth. And there were a multitude of technological policy interventions that happened owing to this, owing to citizens moving towards a better air quality in LA. Right? Why? Because they were scared for their health, they could not breathe, they had to wear the masks that all of us are so used to wearing nowadays. Unfortunately, But that is how bad the pollution was, that they had to do something about it because it was affecting their health and their well-being. So check engine lights started being used because, if your engines were faulty, it polluted more. The CATF was set in place. The Federal Air Act came into being in the US. Soon the global conversation about this started, and those electrolytic converters, I'm forgetting the name, were put in exhaust pipes of cars so that pollution would be less in terms of emissions from uh, vehicles. And so many policy tech innovations happened within the field of sustainability because of this LA smog. And all of this then sort of transcended into the 1972 Stockholm conference that all of us know about, right? The one of the largest conferences on environment, which set the ball rolling towards all the later agreements of environment that have taken place. In terms of India, after the 1972 Stockholm Conference, there was the Water Act in 1974, Air Act in 1981, Environment Protection Act in 1986. And again, you can see that this situation in LA got the global environmental ball rolling. A lot of academics also call it the golden age of environment because it led to the Stockholm Conference, domestic legislation, so on and so forth. Now, all of that is a well-known fact, and a lot of good came out of this golden age of environment where Stockholm Conference happened and domestic legislations came about. But if I were to ask you that why did all of this happen? What was the reason for all of these folks on your screen to agitate for a better environment? The answer to that question is that they wanted a better health, better lifestyle, better infrastructure, better health of their unborn, newborns, and hence we were ushered into the golden age of environment, right? Now, to put things in perspective, the most celebrated age of environment, starting with the 1972 Stockholm Conference, ending with domestic legislations across the globe, started because of the most anthropocentric reasons. Reasons where it was limited to our health and our children's health and better visibility, not having to wear these hideous masks. And that's what got the ball rolling. Even to usher us into the golden age of environment, we had to rely on anthropocentrism. And so for those of you who think that you're ecocentric, you should realize that humanity's golden age of environment was ushered in because of anthropocentrism. But I have another question for you, and I would not take very long on this because I also want to take questions from all of you. But if I have to ask you, say the government after this agitation said that, all right, we must control the pollution. Let's get everyone to comply with higher emissions, higher standards of emissions, more converters and pollution control devices in their vehicles, in their industries, in their factories, everywhere. Let's control the pollution. Then who had to bear the cost for installing those new devices or applying to the government for new compliances or apply to take more consents in terms of the air laws and water laws and environment protection laws and environment impact assessment laws and restricting their emissions who had to bear the cost? The cost had to be borne by these people that you see on the screens, right? These people who drive in their cars, these people who work in these buildings. Because this guy, one morning, he wakes up and he realizes that to operate his existing factory, he needs to apply for new permits, and to go to the bank, he has to get a new air filter installed in his car, and he now has to pay a heavier fine if he is caught polluting. He now has to pay greater toll charges in terms of curbing pollution. So the fact of the matter is, this generation of people who agitated for a better environment also had to pay the fiscal costs of employing these new environmental policies, right? Now, the issue is that who led to this state of smog? Was it only this generation of people? And the answer is no. This sort of a pollution has been caused on account of generations and generations and generations of pollution, right? All of that cumulatively has given us this air quality. So the question is, if generations of people have polluted and benefited from such pollution economically and societally, then why should only these folks on your screens have to pay for it? Right? If generations have profited from absolutely hampering the environment, then why should the cleanup costs be borne only by these people? And that leads us to one of the most defining concepts in environmental policy, which is the concept of the beneficiary pays we have a discussion of views that I might have at UNDP, and we can continue or organize another lecture on this environmental policy when I can talk about the beneficiary pays principle in some more detail. But in the meanwhile, we'd stop here, and I'd be happy to take up any questions or any statements that you might have. So let me open the chat box. Suresh says polluter pays the price. So Suresh, specifically to explain the concept that I was discussing, polluter pays principle is a forward-looking principle, right? So if you pollute, you pay, right? Or if you have polluted, you pay. It's more recent in its timeline. So if you caused an oil spill yesterday, you'll have to pay tomorrow. If you caused some hazardous pollution a year back, you'll have to pay today. Beneficiary pays principle is a backward-looking approach. So in terms of timelines, it's a larger timeline when we're talking across generations, right? So that is the difference between polluter pays principle and the beneficiary pays principle. Beneficiary pays principle can also be cruxed on the larger topic of CBDR, or common but differentiated responsibility, which we sort of touched upon. So I have two very good questions. First to Heneth, if we have any ideas for decreasing pollution, how can we reach you for guidance? You could go to www.gpods.org and you can write to me directly. I'm happy to take it up. or the good folks at AIM, Atal Innovation Mission, or UNDP India can also pass on my contacts with you. You can also add me on LinkedIn, and I'm very approachable on LinkedIn. Happy to have a discussion there as well. Amrit also asks a question. Is it possible to facilitate solar energy without displacing tribals from their lands and causing deforestation? So, Amrita, excellent question, very relevant as well, and very topical, because that's been happening for about a decade now. Now, first of all, almost every renewable energy source, there's hardly any energy, renewable or otherwise, that does not have any environmental impact, right? Whether you talk of wind farms that require cleared lands, so do or solar energy farms. They also have storage units. Storages can have battery disposal issues, which causes a lot of waste, in some cases waste that is harmful to the environment itself. So you're absolutely right, Amrit. There are environmental impacts to solar and other forms of renewable energy too. But at some point of time, you need to, one, move towards a non-fossil fuel based economy. If I were to ask you what's the cleanest form of energy, a question that I'd once asked my professor of energy laws, and I'll tell you what the answer I got was. Yes, I'll come to your question, Amrit. The answer I got when I asked my professor as to what the cleanest form of energy is, was that the energy that you do not use is the cleanest form of energy. Which means that we can go on and on about the supply side, about solar and wind and clearance of land and displacing tribal communities, as you very rightly point out. The fact of the matter is that our demand side of energy is as big an issue. So unless we cut down on our demand, unless we start conserving energy, and unless we become more efficient with our energy usage, unless we start using devices that are more energy efficient, this becomes a chicken and egg bit of an issue. So that's one. The second thing is, for establishing any renewable energy plant, and this is more towards the policy side, you need to have environmental clearance, right? An environment impact assessment process needs to take place, and this is almost globally accepted. And technically, if you look at the environment impact assessment process, you have to give alternatives, better alternatives, worse alternatives, but you have to consider alternatives to setting up that project. Now, you could argue that if you are planning to develop a solar farm having to displace people, then you should give more alternatives and move elsewhere, or you could argue that if you're planning to establish a solar farm that is displacing people, then you could do it in a way that does not displace people at all. But those are the technical trivialities that you have to go through to set up a project, which means that our governance systems need to be better off, more specialized technocrats and bureaucrats in the environmental domain to help manage and govern this process better. So Suresh has put a question: if renewable energy itself has an environmental impact, then why go for renewable energy at all? Well, Suresh, the magnitude is completely different. Also, they've been given a bit of a non-holistic level playing field. What do I mean by that? According to some conservative estimates, and I'm not subscribing to those estimates, or I'm not saying they're authoritatively right, but according to some conservative estimates, about $785 billion are given by way of subsidies for the fossil fuel-based economy, for fossil fuels. $785 billion go out by way of subsidies to fossil fuels. So imagine if that sort of a subsidy was just moved away from fossil fuels into renewable energies. I'm sure there'll be a lot more innovation and a lot more clean alternatives to renewable energy as well, or clean processes. All right. If there aren't any other questions, I'll give it back to Kasturi. I think I have made good time and promised and stuck to the time that I promised I'd stick to, but I'd love to hear from all of you. And I'm happy to have a discussion outside of this session as well. Again, I'm also always happy to speak with more folks about sustainability, and I know that our time was short today, but I'll be happy to come back again and discuss more on this in the time to come. All right, over to you, Kasturi. Sorry, is that all? Yes, Kasturi, you could go on at any point.
All right, sir. What a knowledgeable workshop, I must say. We thank you so much, sir, for this beautiful experience. And thank you to all the participants who joined us in this session. And of course, Professor Ishan sir, for sure, we would like you to come back and give us more insightful knowledge like this. And we would we would like to thank AIM and UNDP team. And with this, we come to the end of today's workshop. Thank you all.